Most tenants don't realize how many rights they actually have, and landlords love that. From clauses you're allowed to challenge to repairs they're legally required to handle, there's far more power on the tenant side than most landlords would ever admit. Now, before we start, this list is for educational purposes only. Use it wisely. And if this knowledge ruffles a few feathers on your landlord's side, you'll have to handle that part on your own. I'm Mike with List25, and today we're breaking down 25 useful things your landlord doesn't want you to know. 25. You can negotiate your lease. Alright, another note before we begin. Let me just say I am not a lawyer, and to please not take this as set in stone legal advice. A lot of this depends on where you live. For example, Florida, where I live, is widely considered a landlord-friendly state, while California is known for having some of the most robust tenant protections in the country. So, take everything you hear today with a grain of salt and check what's legal in your own area. Okay, now let's get into it. A lot of tenants walk into a lease signing like it's a carved-in-stone agreement handed down from the mountaintop. Landlords love that approach because it means you'll accept whatever numbers, rules, and penalties they put on the page. What most renters never hear is that a lot of those terms are negotiable long before you sign anything. Rent, renewal options, late fees, pet rules, parking, and even how often they can raise the rent are all fair game. Landlords hate vacancies, and an empty unit costs them money every single day. So, ask questions, push back on the stuff that doesn't work for you, and propose changes that actually fit your life instead of theirs. Speaking up at the start can save you money, avoid future arguments, and land you a lease that doesn't feel like a trap waiting to spring. 24. Landlords can't just walk in whenever they want. In most areas, landlords have to give you proper notice before stepping through your door, usually somewhere between 24 and 48 hours. It protects your privacy, your schedule, and your basic dignity as a renter. Emergencies are the only real exception, and even those have limits. When surprise visits become a habit, tenants can push back, document the pattern, and take it further if the behavior doesn't stop. Your home is still your home, whether you rent or own it. A landlord who respects that will follow the notice requirement without being reminded. 23. Your home must meet basic safety standards. Housing law doesn't expect you to live in unsafe or uninhabitable conditions. There is a built-in standard your landlord has to meet, even if they never bring it up. The implied warranty of habitability, in simple terms, says that your unit has to be safe and functional from the day you move in. That means working heat, steady plumbing, safe electrical systems, decent ventilation, and a home free from mold, pests, or anything that puts your health at risk. None of this depends on what the lease says, and the obligation is automatic. When a rental falls below that baseline, tenants aren't stuck. You can request repairs, report violations, call for inspections, or in some areas, withhold the rent until everything gets fixed. 22. Evictions have rules. Evictions have a strict process, and skipping any step is illegal almost everywhere. That means no changing locks while you're at work, no shutting off the water or electricity to encourage you to leave, and no tossing your belongings into the hallway. Those maneuvers fall under unlawful eviction, and courts take them seriously. A landlord who wants someone out has to give them proper written notice, file the case, and wait for a judge's order before anything happens. When they try to bypass that system, tenants can fight back. There are a number of countries where renters can sue for damages, recover costs, or even have their tenancy reinstated if the eviction was handled illegally. These protections exist because losing your home is one of the most disruptive events in a person's life, and the law doesn't let landlords trigger that on a whim. 21. Retaliation is illegal. What happens when a tenant speaks up about a serious problem in their building? In too many cases, the landlord suddenly develops an attitude and starts looking for ways to make life difficult. Maybe the rent jumps overnight, services mysteriously get reduced, or an eviction threat pops up out of nowhere. Retaliation is illegal, and courts treat it as a direct attack on a tenant's basic rights. Reporting code violations, asking for repairs, or exercising any legal protection is not grounds for punishment. When a landlord tries to push back by raising rent, cutting access to amenities, or starting eviction proceedings right after a complaint, they're walking straight into a legal mess. The key is documentation. Keeping written records of every request, issue, and conversation makes it far easier to prove what happened and when. 20. You're entitled to quiet enjoyment. You'd expect that once you rent a place, you get to actually live in it without chaos creeping in every other day. That's the whole idea behind the right to quiet enjoyment. It protects tenants from harassment, constant disruptions, and any behavior that makes the home feel more like a stress test than a living space. The issue is that plenty of landlords and neighbors push those limits. Loud renovations at unreasonable hours, non-stop disturbances, or a landlord who shows up again and again for no real reason all cut into this right. Even construction work has rules around timing and duration because the law recognizes that tenants deserve predictable, livable conditions. And just like habitability protections, this right doesn't depend on the lease spelling it out. It exists by default. 19. Security deposits have strict rules. What actually happens at the end of a lease is governed by a pretty tight set of rules, and landlords don't get to bend them just because keeping the money is convenient. Every region sets its own deadline for returning deposits, and landlords have to follow it. They can only charge for real damage, not the normal wear you'd expect from someone simply living in a place. And if they keep anything, they have to spell it out clearly with receipts or written explanations. No vague cleaning fees or extra wear or other mystery deductions. Tenants who document the condition of their rental with photos, checklists, and written communication often win these disputes because the burden is on the landlord to justify every dollar. When they don't follow the rules, renters can challenge it and sometimes recover extra penalties on top. Your deposit isn't a bonus for the landlord. It's your money, and the law treats it that way. 18. You can ask for proof of repair costs. There's another layer to the fact that your deposit isn't a free-for-all. You also have the right to question the numbers behind any repair charge a landlord wants to bill you for. A vague note about repairs isn't enough. Landlords often have to show real invoices, itemized statements, or receipts that match the deduction. If there's no proof, the deduction usually falls apart. This creates a very different conversation. Suddenly, the landlord can't rely on mystery fees or padded repair lists. They have to justify every number. And when they can't, tenants often recover the money. If they bill you, they need to show the math. 17. You can challenge illegal lease clauses. So, you sit down to read your new lease, and right there in the middle of the page is a clause that feels off. Maybe it says you're responsible for every repair, or that the landlord can enter whenever they feel like it, or that certain legal protections don't apply in this building. What a coincidence. Here's the truth. A lease can't erase housing law. Any clause that tries to waive your right to repairs, allow unlawful entry, or strip you of basic protections is usually dead on arrival. Courts throw these provisions out all the time because tenant laws outrank whatever creative contract language a landlord comes up with. 16. Repairs are usually the landlord's responsibility. If you've ever lived in a rental, you've probably dealt with something breaking and ended up paying for it yourself just to make the problem go away. A lot of tenants do that without realizing the law usually puts those repairs squarely on the landlord. Anything tied to the basic functioning of the home is generally their job to maintain. That includes plumbing that keeps backing up, wiring that isn't safe, heating that quits in the middle of winter, or a roof that lets in water. Even appliances listed on the lease fall under that responsibility in many areas. When a landlord refuses to fix something essential, some places allow renters to arrange their repair themselves and subtract the cost from their rent. But, and this is important, only if they follow the proper steps. That usually means written notice, time for the landlord to respond, and solid documentation of the problem and the repair. 15. Subletting can be legal. If your lease allows subletting, or if the landlord signs off on it, you're perfectly within your rights to have someone take over the space while you're away. People use it for a variety of reasons. For example, to cover rent during travel, job changes, financial crunches, or temporary relocations. And in some regions, a landlord who rejects a reasonable sublet request without a valid reason can actually land on the wrong side of tenant law. Just be sure to read the lease, know the local regulations, and get everything in writing. As long as the subtenant follows the same terms you agreed to, you're using a perfectly legal tool that gives you breathing room when life changes. 14. You can document everything. Okay, I know I've touched on this already, but I cannot say it enough. If you don't keep records of everything when it comes to a rental situation, your problem bends in their favor. With nothing to point to, it becomes very easy for them to say that the issue never happened or that it wasn't as serious as you claim. Once you start documenting, that setup falls apart. A few photos, a timestamp message, or a written follow-up turns a vague complaint into a very clear timeline. When a dispute shows up over repairs, habitability, or a security deposit, that trail of evidence speaks louder than anything either side says in the moment. And here's the part landlords don't love. Good documentation takes the guesswork out of the story. It shows exactly what happened and when, which makes it harder for someone to dodge any responsibility later. 13. Your area might limit rent increases. Cities and regional housing boards often set limits on how much rent can go up each year, and some require landlords to justify increases with paperwork, not just a letter taped to your door. The catch is that these rules vary wildly from place to place. Some areas have full rent control, others have caps tied to inflation. A few require landlords to give longer notice before any increase, and if you don't know what applies where you live, it's very easy to accept a number that shouldn't have been legal in the first place. The easiest way to check? Look up your city or county's housing authority, tenant rights office, or rental board. Most have public guidelines posted online, and local tenant unions often break them down in plain language. Once you know the limits, you can challenge illegal hikes and make sure any increase follows the rules, not your landlord's creativity. 12. You can't be evicted for reporting problems. When conditions in a building slip into unsafe territory, tenants have every right to call inspectors, file complaints with code enforcement, or reach out to tenant advocates. These steps are protected actions. A landlord can't turn around and use them as an excuse to push someone out, start harassing them, or pretend the lease suddenly has a problem that didn't exist last month. Speaking up forces the issue into the open, and once the authorities are involved, the landlord no longer controls the narrative. Knowing you're protected takes a lot of the fear out of the situation. It gives tenants the confidence to address problems head on instead of tiptoeing around issues that should have been fixed long ago. 11. Rent can be held back under specific conditions. In places where rent withholding is allowed, tenants are not expected to keep paying when their home reaches a point where normal life is no longer possible. If major issues make the space unsafe or unworkable, like plumbing that keeps failing, heat that no longer works, or serious structural problems, the law may let tenants pause their payments until the repairs are actually done. This is not a free-for-all though. Each area follows its own process, often involving a written step, a waiting period, or a neutral third party who confirms the problem. But it helps to know you might have some power when the home needs serious attention and nothing else has worked. A pause in payments creates a financial incentive that's hard to ignore, and that often pushes repairs forward far faster than repeated reminders ever could. 10. You can break a lease under certain conditions. Housing law makes room for situations where staying put is unreasonable or unsafe, and those rules give tenants more room to move than most people realize. When a home becomes uninhabitable through serious health or safety failures, tenants, in many places, can leave without penalty. The same is true when a landlord crosses certain lines, such as ignoring major violations or breaking key terms of the lease. And beyond housing problems, many regions have carve-outs for specific personal circumstances, including military deployment, domestic violence, stalking, and other situations where remaining in the unit is not a realistic option. Knowing when they apply allows renters to step away from a bad situation instead of absorbing penalties they never owed in the first place. 9. You can challenge late fees. A lot of landlords assume tenants won't question late fees, so they throw out whatever amount sounds convincing. That confidence fades quickly once you look at the rules in many regions, because those fees often have legal caps and must reflect the actual cost of the delay, not act as a penalty to pressure tenants. Some areas only allow a modest fee, while others tie the limit to a percentage that keeps things reasonable. When a landlord tries to charge more than that, the fees often collapse under scrutiny. The same applies to penalties that never appeared in the lease in the first place. A fee introduced halfway through a tenancy rarely passes the legal smell test. When tenants understand these boundaries, landlords lose the ability to wave a number around as if it's carved in stone. A request to justify the fee changes the momentum of the discussion, and inflated charges often disappear once the illegal framework is brought out into the open. 8. Verbal promises can be enforceable. You also get landlords who make promises they never intend to commit to on paper. The fix will be done soon, the rent will stay the same next year, and the appliance upgrade is already ordered. That casual approach is exactly why tenants often let it slide. You feel reassured, you take them at their word, and you move in believing the agreement is understood. And then, all of a sudden, the landlord acts like nothing was ever discussed. Depending on where you live, those verbal agreements can carry legal weight if you relied on them when choosing the unit. Courts look at text messages, emails, witness comments, and whether the promise influenced your decision. Landlords often hope you won't push the issue, but reliance is a real standard. If they made a commitment that mattered, it doesn't disappear just because they never wrote it down. 7. Disability accommodations are a legal right. Renting becomes a lot tougher when a disability runs into a building or a set of policies that weren't built with everyone in mind. That's exactly why tenants with disabilities are allowed to ask for changes that make day-to-day living possible. These requests aren't favors, and they're not optional gestures. They come straight from housing and anti-discrimination laws that require landlords to make the home workable. An accommodation can take many forms. It might be letting a support animal live in a building that normally bans pets, assigning a parking spot close to the entrance, or adjusting a policy that gets in the way of basic routines. Sometimes it means allowing simple physical additions, like a grab bar in the bathroom or a small ramp to help navigate the space. What landlords cannot do is deny a reasonable request without a solid legal reason or raise fees because of it. These measures are in place to make sure tenants can actually use the home they're paying for, and the law expects landlords to honor them. 6. Mold is a legal deal breaker. Remember that part where I mentioned tenants sometimes have the right to walk away from a lease or hold back rent when a home becomes too unsafe to stay in? Mold sits firmly in that category, and it can be a genuine health hazard. But the bigger issue is usually what the mold represents. In many cases, it points to underlying problems, like leaks behind the walls, damp foundations, or ventilation issues. When these problems show up, landlords have a legal responsibility to address both the mold and the cause behind it. A quick spray and wipe approach doesn't do anything, and courts have rejected it repeatedly. When the problem is extensive, tenants may even need to be relocated while repairs happen. And when landlords delay or ignore the issue, they can end up facing rent reductions, fines, or compensation claims. 5. As-is clauses don't cancel safety laws. As-is language doesn't wipe away basic legal obligations. Even though it basically means you have to take what you get, a landlord still has to provide working utilities, safe wiring, stable floors and ceilings, and a home free from serious health hazards. That responsibility doesn't disappear because a phrase in the lease makes it sound like you're stuck with whatever you find behind the door. This wording shows up all the time, especially in older buildings or quick move-ins, and tenants often feel boxed in by it. But tenant laws override any private agreement that tries to sidestep safety standards. And yes, courts throw out as-is clauses the moment they collide with basic habitability requirements. A lease can say a lot of things, but it can't erase the right to a safe and livable home. 4. Hidden fees have to be disclosed. Most places require every fee to be disclosed before the lease is signed. Application charges, administrative add-ons, monthly service fees, whatever a landlord wants to collect has to be laid out in writing upfront. If they slip in something afterward, that surprise charge is usually unenforceable, and courts tend to take the tenant's side when there's no paper trail to back it up. Landlords rely on renters not questioning those extras, which is why keeping copies of disclosures and communications matters. When the fees don't match the agreement, tenants have a solid ground to challenge them. Transparency is the legal standard, so if it wasn't disclosed, it doesn't belong on the bill. 3. You can form or join a tenant union. In multiple cities and countries, renters have the legal right to organize. That includes forming a tenant association, sharing information with neighbors, holding meetings, or approaching the landlord as a group about repairs, rent concerns, or building conditions. It is all protected activity, even if the landlord doesn't like the idea of everyone comparing notes. They might try to discourage meetings, shut down group chats, or claim organizing is not allowed on the property. Some go further with threats of rent hikes or eviction notices. Moves like that can backfire badly, because retaliation against organizing tenants is illegal in a lot of places. Tenant unions exist to level the playing field. One voice is easy to brush aside. A whole building is not. 2. You can request a move-in inspection report. In some cities and countries, you're entitled to a move-in inspection the moment you start a lease. Not every tenant realizes that, and plenty of landlords hope you never bring it up. A proper inspection creates a record of existing scratches, stains, aging appliances, and anything else that was there long before you arrived. Skip it, and suddenly every old flaw becomes your damage at move-out. A move-in report can be written notes, photos, or walkthrough checklist. And while some places require landlords to provide one automatically, others expect tenants to request it, which is where many disputes start. A landlord who resists the idea often knows exactly how useful that record will be later. 1. You can refuse illegal lease addenda. Finally, let's look at a trick some landlords pull when they want new power without waiting for the lease to end. They slide a fresh addendum under your door, send a rushed email, or call you with updated terms, acting as if you have no choice but to accept whatever they came up with. Higher fees, new restrictions, extra responsibilities. Take it or leave it. Their pressure usually works because they make it feel urgent. You're already living there and you don't want conflict. And the landlord sounds confident enough that you start wondering if you really do have to sign. That's exactly the trap. Most active leases lock in the term for the entire duration, and landlords cannot rewrite the deal halfway through unless the original contract gives them that power or you agree to it in writing. It's a piece of paper with no legal weight behind it. You're allowed to say no. And in many cases, that's the correct answer. And that's where I'll call it for today. But hold up, before you go, I'd love to hear which entry hit closest to home. Was there something on this list that you wish you'd known years ago? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if you're curious about how everyday power works outside the rental world, our related video, 25 Tricks Cops Don't Want You to Know, breaks down the tactics police officers use that most people never hear about. That link should pop up right about here any second. Thank you guys so much for being here. You guys are truly awesome. As always, like, share, comment, subscribe, notification bell so you don't miss anything, and I'll see you guys next time.